Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. It is March, and we're excited to share some of the great titles that we've been reading over the last few weeks. As we share these books with you, if you'd like to get your hands on them, there are several ways to go about doing that. The first and probably the quickest is to just call your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and speak to the staff there, and they'll be more than happy to assist you. You'll also see our titles are available. Some are in physical versions, and if you're interested in those, a hardcover and an audiobook on CD, you can go straight to our online catalog and request them for yourself that way, and that web address is on your screen now. Some of the titles you'll see are available through Libby or Hoopla, and those are our digital apps that you can access through your device. And you just go onto the app and look for the title and download it. Libby provides downloadable ebooks and audiobooks and also magazines. And Hoopla provides the same downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla in particular is if you see a lightning bolt next to the title, that means that that item is immediately available. And almost all the titles on Hoopla are immediately available and are able to be downloaded by more than one person at a time. So make sure to check those out if you're interested in digital versions. I'm Jennifer Graneski, and I'm the Dundee Area Supervisor. And this month, to kick us off, and as our introduction question, since March is Women's History Month, I thought it would be a good idea for each of us to spotlight a particular woman from women's history that we're interested in. And after I sent the question out, I thought, I don't know who I want to spotlight. So being a librarian, I immediately went to the online catalog and typed in women's history, trying to figure out who I would want to talk about. And some amazing women's history books, and I did my best not to get carried away. But Troublemakers in Trousers, What Women Wore Throughout History as They Changed History. This is fascinating, so check it out. Also, Rebel Girls is a publisher that publishes all sorts of amazing books. They have these collections about different women from history. They also have started a children's historical fiction series about different women from history. So if you have littles in your life or you're just interested in learning more about women you may not have known about, you can check one of these out. But the one that I finally chose was On This Day, She. Putting women back into history one day at a time. And for March 17th, I loved who was chosen. It's Golda Meir. And if you haven't heard of Golda Meir, she was elected the Prime Minister of Israel in 1969 on March 17th. And to date, she is the first and only woman to hold that office in Israel. She was the leader of Israel during the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was attacked by surrounding nations during the 70s. And I love this entry. I'm not going to read it all to you, but there is a quote that I loved from Golda Meir. The nation's first prime minister, Ben-Gurion, apparently described Meir as the only man in his cabinet, because she was known for her toughness and ability to make good decisions. Meir's response to that, what amused me about that, she said, is that he, or whoever told the story about him, thought that this was the greatest compliment that could be paid to a woman. I just love that. Thank you, Golda Meir. And I find the history of the Middle East and of Israel in particular fascinating because I was able to visit there. So the Yom Kippur War is a really important part of their history. And so that's my woman in history. Golda Meir, first female prime minister and so far only female prime minister of Israel. So there's mine. Also with us this time is Jessica Otto, who is our head of collections. And what woman did you choose to spotlight, Jessica?
Well, so when we get to my titles, I will be spotlighting a historical figure from women's history. But in our opening, I wanted to spotlight a more contemporary figure in women's history that has been very influential to me, which is the fitness guru, Jillian Michaels. I work out with her videos at least 6 days a week, if not 7. I absolutely love her philosophy on life and fitness in particular, that fitness is, it's not about looking a certain way. It's not about fitting into a certain size clothes. It's about taking your power back. It's about taking back control of your health and your body. And she's really instilled this in me that for the most part in life, that the only limitations we have are those that we put on ourselves, and that most of us are capable of so much more than we ever think possible. We just have to be willing to take those first steps, try. We have to be willing to do things that scare us and to make us uncomfortable. And the more we do it, keep at it, we will go beyond the fabric of the boundaries that we have created for ourselves. We'll stretch those boundaries out, and it'll make us better, not just in fitness, which is her particular area, but we can apply that in all aspects of our life. So yeah, she's the one I choose to spotlight because she is such an inspiration to me.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. And also with us is Jody Russ, who is the community librarian of our Bedford branch library. And who have you chosen to spotlight, Jody?
Listen, I'm going to be honest and say I didn't prepare very well for my homework today. So I'm just going to pull somebody out of because I would love to. I'm very involved in robotics. I have coached a all-girl robotics team for many, many years. I feel very passionate that girls need to be involved in science and technology and engineering and math, and they do so well at all of those things when they realize that they have the ability to do things just as well as anybody else does them. And so I would love to say, let me spotlight somebody who has something to do in that kind of a context. But the two people that I most thought of, one was Henrietta Lacks, because she is the woman whose cells helped us get to the point where we are with cancer, right? And so the story about her is a very interesting one. We read it as a book club read a couple of years ago now, and I found that very interesting. But Michelle Obama would be my other one, because she's just such a generous person and so outspoken about women, but in such a kind way that it never comes across as demeaning to anyone else, that women have the strength and power to be whatever it is that they want to be in whatever way that they want to be that. And she's done such amazing things with her own life, obviously, and then takes that, realizes the what her prominence brings to a cause and takes that out and does good things with it. So I really admire her.
Thank you, Jody. And she, for those of you who don't know, she has a brand new book out as well. I can't think of the title of it right now, but call our libraries and we'll help you get your hands on it if you're interested. Thank you, Jody. And I am going to ask Jessica to go ahead and kick us off with some books that she's been enjoying recently.
Sure. So for my first title, so back in January, we discussed books that we were looking forward to read in 2023. And my first title was like my biggest anticipated read of 2023, The Big Bundle by Max Allan Collins. So now here we are, 2 months later, the book has been published. It's come full circle. I've been able to read it, and I am excited to say that I was not disappointed. True crime ripped from the headlines, and private eye to the stars, Nathan Heller, is on the case in a brand new adventure in this brilliant blending of fact and fiction. So this book and the story is centered around an actual real life high profile crime, a kidnapping of a 6-year-old boy named Bobby Greenlease that occurred in Kansas City, Missouri in 1953. Bobby's father, Robert Greenlease Sr., was a wealthy automobile dealer. And one day a woman showed up at Bobby's school claiming to be Bobby's aunt. She said that Bobby's mother had suffered some type of medical emergency and that she needed to take Bobby out of school to take him to be with his mother at the hospital. The school saw the woman was very upset. They didn't question anything, just gave her the boy. And then a short while later, they called the Greenlease home to check on the condition of the mother, only to find out that the story of the medical emergency was completely false. Within a few hours, the Greenlease family received the first ransom letter concerning the return of their son. They were, so the kidnappers were asking for $600,000 for Bobby's safe return, which was one of the highest ransom demands in history at that in 1953. So the story is divided into 2 books. At the start of book 1, Nathan Heller is arriving in Kansas City almost a week after the kidnapping. And he's been hired by Robert Greenlease to investigate alongside the police and the FBI. Nate learns that the kidnappers have been leading the Greenlease family on basically one wild goose chase after another. They have received 6 ransom letters and 12 phone calls with instructions so complex and convoluted that not even the kidnappers themselves can understand them. Over and over, the family leaves the money in the specified area only for the kidnappers to call and say that they could not find it. So tired of this endless runaround, Nate takes advantage of his underworld connections that he is so well known for, which leads him to what may be his first big break in the case. Now, without giving any spoilers, by the end of book 1, we find out how this whole kidnapping plot resolves, with the exception of, at some point during all this craziness and mayhem, half of the ransom money, which is $300,000, goes missing. Now, $300,000 is still a lot of money today. However, I looked this up, and so $300,000 in 1953 has a 2023 value of $3.4 million. So that is a lot of missing moolah. So the most shocking part of this book is at the start of book 2, which takes place 5 years after the kidnapping, when Nate takes his 11-year-old son to Disneyland. What is so shocking about a trip to Disneyland, you ask? The price of admission in 1958, which was all of $1. $1, Bob. $1. Now, my understanding is you had to pay to get in then for $1, and then if you actually wanted to ride any rides, you had to pay a per ride cost, but it was like 10 cents per ride. So seems pretty reasonable compared to today's prices. So now Nate is not just in California to spend some time with his son. He has also been hired by not 1, not 2, but 3 high-powered individuals, all looking to find out what happened to that missing ransom money 5 years before. I would say that he was double dipping, but it was more like he was triple dipping. But hey, a private eye's got to eat too. So the first person that he needs to interview is a former Kansas City cab driver, now living in LA, who may know more about the money than anyone, if he is willing to talk. So from there, Nate's investigation into the missing money takes him back to Missouri, this time to St. Louis, where he deals with shady motel operators, corrupt police turned dry cleaning specialists, union bosses, local mobsters, and of course, a connection to the Chicago outfit, aka the Chicago mob. When it's all said and done, Nate's investigation will reveal a sinister plot of deception and depravity that has spiraled out of control with consequences that reach into the corridors of power of Washington, D.C. The Big Bundle is a must-read for fans of the Nathan Heller series. I also recommend the book to fans of true crime, since much of the plot in this book is based on actual events that occurred in the 50s. I also recommend it for fans of fiction based on historical events. In this book, once again, Collins has expertly weaved his fictional creation, Nathan Heller, into a true crime story. As Publisher Weekly says of the book, Collins again artfully uses a real-life crime, one now obscure, but headline-making in the 1950s, as the springboard for a crackerjack plot. This is another standout in a consistently good series. So on to my second title. So as we mentioned in the opening, March is Women's History Month. So I wanted to take the opportunity to share the story of a real-life American shero, Grace Baker. Recently added to the MCLS collection, Grace Baker and Her Hello Girls, Answer the Call, by Claudia Friedel and illustrated by Elizabeth Baddeley, is the heroic story of the World War I telephone operators. This picture book with amazing illustrations blends Friedel's prose along with actual quotes from Grace's diaries and interviews. So it's December 1917 and the world was at war. 25-year-old Grace Baker opened a newspaper to discover an advertisement from U.S. Army General John J. Pershing, asking young women of America to serve their country along with his expeditionary forces in France. So this was huge. Women at this time had never been allowed to serve in the U.S. Army. In fact, women were not even allowed to vote at this time. And even though Grace knew that, women's rights were definitely not where she should have been, as the book says, Grace was used to marching in a man's world. And she knew that this was at least something, a step in the right direction. And so she used this as an opportunity to advance, not just for herself, but for women's rights. So Grace knew that she had exactly the skills that she needed to join what was known as the Signal Corps. She had a college education, she was fluent in French, and she had advanced telephone operator experience. Grace answered General Pershing's call and hoped that she would be accepted into the Signal Corps. In her own words, full of youthful enthusiasm, I enlisted. When Grace received a response, she learned that not only had she been accepted into the Signal Corps, but that she was named the chief operator. After 2 months of classes and drills, Grace and her Signal Corps girls left the U.S. to join the world at war. So the role of the Signal Corps girls was vital to the war effort. They connected and allowed communication between General Pershing's headquarters and to the soldiers and battlefield commanders out on the front lines. As time went on, the Signal Corps girls, they had to move their headquarters closer to the front, which put them really in the line of fire. The women had to keep helmets and gas masks hanging on their chairs at all times because they never knew what danger might come their way. So despite these conditions, Grace and her Signal Corps girls worked tirelessly to connect hundreds of orders in an hour, thousands of commands in a day. As much as this is a story of women's history, this is also an important work on the history of communication. In our day and age now, we are so used to being able to connect instantly with anyone, anywhere, that it's easy to forget that was not always the case. And so I think that in addition to the women's history aspect, this book can be a great tool for introducing our younger readers on how much communication has changed over the years. So after months of work, Grace and her Signal Corps girls got to be present on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month when one final order went out to the battlefield commanders, and that was simply cease fire. After the war in 1919, Grace received the Distinguished Service Medal, which is the U.S. Army's highest honor for someone not serving in combat. Grace accepted the award as a tribute to the girls who worked under me at the First Army and to the Signal Corps men operators scattered throughout France in tiny field offices. So now, as I said, this book is a picture book intended for a juvenile audiences. If you are interested in this topic and are looking for something a little more in depth, author Jennifer Chiavarini just released actually a full-length novel in 2022 called Switchboard Soldiers, which tells the tale of Grace Banker and her Signal Corps girls, which is currently available to request through MCLS in multiple formats. So Grace Banker and her Hello Girls Answer the Call is a great introduction to the role of women in World War I and also to the history of telephone communication. In the words of Grace's granddaughter, Carolyn Timby, this captivating book vividly recounts how one courageous and intelligent young woman, along with her Signal Corps girls, helped win the war. With this beautifully illustrated glimpse into the past, you'll feel as if you're there cheering them on.
Thank you, Jessica. That's fascinating. I feel like anytime we do these or anytime somebody shares something from history, I'm like, yep, missed that. Must not have been in class that day. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And now Jody will share the books that she's been reading and enjoying.
Okay, so the first one that I am going to talk about is called Mad Honey by Jodi Picoult. And I think most people who read avidly probably know Jodi Picoult, and she's a best-selling author, and she covers a lot of hard topics. And she isn't afraid to take on things that are controversial. So in this particular book, she actually has a character who's transgender. And the book was written with Jennifer Finney Boylan, who's a nationally known advocate for human rights and a transgender person herself. Jennifer says in the author interview at the end of the audiobook, so first of all, I highly recommend this in audio format. I highly recommend both of the books I'm going to talk about in audio format, just because that listening to them provides a completely, to me, much deeper understanding of the story itself. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with both of these. But so Jennifer Finney Boylan says in an author interview at the end of the audiobook that she had a dream that she co-authored a book with Jodi Picoult. And she woke up from that dream and she posted to her Instagram account, "Hey, just had a weird dream that I co-authored a book with Jodi Picoult." And Jodi Picoult reached out to Jennifer and said, "Hey, let's write it." And so that's what happened. And so it's like, kind of a magical thing that just occurred. So that that was a pretty cool component of the story itself. So in the story, the main character is Olivia, who is a woman, I think in her early 40s, but I'm not positive about that, who has started over. She had grown up on a farm in New Hampshire where her father was a beekeeper. And at the beginning of the story, you find out that her parents have passed away and she's decided to move back home and take care of the bees. But and she has a son who's in high school, whose name is Asher, who is also one of the main characters in the story. You find out as you go through the story, it kind of tells what's going on currently and then what has happened in the past that's led them here. So Olivia was in an abusive relationship and has escaped from her husband and took her son with her and is trying to make a successful life for them in this small New Hampshire town. And so then the next main character who comes in's name is Lily Campanello, and she is a girl in Asher's class in high school, and she's a new girl in town who is also escaping a past. Her and her mom have moved. Her mom is a park ranger who I think she ends up working for the National Forest Service in New Hampshire, but she had been a park ranger. They had lived on the West Coast, and so they literally packed up their car in the middle of the night from a bad situation and drove across country and settled in this little New Hampshire town. And so Lily meets Asher and they end up falling in love. And this is this great love story of this high school couple. But there's a whole lot of things that you don't really know all the details about with both Asher and Lily. And Olivia doesn't know those things either. So Olivia gets a phone call from her son Asher, and he has found Lily dead. And the next thing that happens is Asher gets arrested for her murder. And so now it's this whole story of who these people all really are and what they have really gone through to get to where they are and who they have become. And I will say, like, I just looked up, I wanted to mention the reason why I love this as an audiobook is that the parts of Lily are read by a young woman whose name is Keetaw, and I don't know who Keetaw is, but apparently she is the cyber fairy. That's what she's known for on Instagram and something else that I don't even pay attention to, but she's fantastic at reading Lily's voice and at helping to develop Lily's humanity and like helping you to understand that we're all people and we all deserve life and respect. And so this particular, just about the audiobook, it says Mad Honey is a riveting novel of suspense, an unforgettable love story, and a moving and powerful exploration of the secrets we keep and the risks we take in order to become ourselves. And it really is a good book, and I highly recommend it. I know the whole transgender thing is kind of a hot topic, and I don't want anybody to be scared away from the story because of that. I think it really helps to develop humanity in this book, and if people are just willing to listen to that and have an open mind, that's a really good step in the right direction. So that is Mad Honey. I think I'm actually going to listen to it a second time. It's one of those kinds of books that you like, wow, and maybe I need to hear that again to really get the rest of that or the deeper details of that. So the second book I'm going to talk about is Spare by Prince Harry. Let me just make it clear. I am not a Royals follower. I am not, there's lots of people who are crazy about the Royals and want to know everything that happens with the Royals. And while I love studying the history, I'm more about the Boleyns and Henry VIII than I am about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. I know what's going on in the world, but I don't necessarily follow those things and, am crazy invested in them. So I started listening to this. First of all, listen to it because Prince Harry reads it, and who doesn't want to listen to that? On any given day, you give me somebody with a lovely voice and an English or Australian accent, I'm all over it. So, Spare starts out with, and I just also should say, I said something to one of our patrons who's like a regular, comes in all the time, about listening to this. And she actually said to me, well, what's he whining about now? And I was a little taken aback because I thought this story is so real and he has exposed himself so well. Like to read this story and to not believe what he's saying, I think I don't know who could do that, to be honest with you. So I guess that's what I really love about it. Like, he's just being human. He's not being a prince or a royal. He's being a person who has had a lot of experience in his life that have been really, really difficult. And he's just telling that story. And the only time, now I'll be honest and say I haven't finished the book. I'm at the point right now where Meghan has just met Charles and Camilla. So there's a whole lot to happen yet, I'm sure. The only people he blames about anything for anything is the paparazzi. That's the only people that he comes across as, I think, it's pretty obvious that he feels like he's gotten kind of the brush off from his dad, from his brother, from Camilla, from a lot of royal courtiers. That stuff he does talk about all of that. But the only people he really blames for all the things that have been so hurtful is the paparazzi, because he directly blames them for his mother's death. And he directly blames them for all the lies that they've spread about him and about Meghan and about, what, and the problem is people believe what they have read in papers, right? So the story starts out with the day that Harry's mom dies in the car accident in 1997. For more than 10 years after that, Harry believed that that was all just a big hoax and that she was in hiding somewhere and she was going to come back, and that she did that on purpose because she had to get away from all the crazy people that were following her and documenting every moment of her life. And so he really seemed to believe that she was going to come back for them, that she would never leave them. And so just to hear that, like as a mom, to hear that, that's just heartbreaking. Because, part of that was they're good Brits. They don't talk about emotions and they don't talk about, painful things. And especially because they're in the royal family, they just don't. And so he had never come to grips with any of that. And so then when all of these other things happen throughout his life, kind of builds on top of that. And so Harry becomes the paparazzi's next favorite target, and they have all kinds of crazy stories they tell about him, from drug addiction and wild parties and all kinds of things. And the royal advisors decide that it's better to let those stories run about Harry, even if they're untrue, because they don't want the spotlight on Charles, who will be the next king, who is now divorced and wants to marry a divorced woman and all of these other things. Not that we didn't know all those things too, right? But like Harry and his craziness was always the top stories about the wild families, as opposed to many of the other things that have happened. And his point being, the majority of all that stuff was untrue, and yet people believed it. So he had to find himself. So he struggled with that, and he was most successful finding himself in the military when he was on active duty, and when he was in Africa, really living out, like sleeping under the stars and various things with wild animals right by him. Interesting that I think it was maybe the 4th date with Meghan, was sleeping in a tent out in the back country in Botswana, because that's where he loves to be. And there's lions snuffling around outside. And he told her then, "You don't have to worry. I will take care of you. I will make sure you are safe." And so that comes back later when the paparazzi is hunting him down, and he's decided he needs to take care of her and make her feel safe. So I haven't gotten to that part yet, but I feel like it's a very real story. It's a very human story. And just because he's a member of the royal family doesn't mean that he doesn't, deserve the respect of any other human as well.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Thank you. I've heard amazing things about Mad Honey. I'm hearing it from patrons. I've heard it from a friend. I've got it on my list. So I'm hearing good things about that. I'm not planning on necessarily reading Spare, but now I kind of want to, or at least listen to it. Thank you, Jody. And my titles, one of them, kind of like Jessica, one of them is one of the books I mentioned in January when we talked about books we were looking forward to reading. And that is Stephen Graham Jones' Don't Fear the Reaper. I've spoken about Stephen Graham Jones on here before. He is an amazing horror author. He is also a Native American horror author. He's part of the Blackfeet Nation. And Don't Fear the Reaper, this was my hard thing choosing books this time, because I seem to only be reading sequels. And it's hard to talk about sequels on here, because then really what I'm doing is telling you to go read the first book in the series. So the first book in this series is My Heart is a Chainsaw. And yes, you really need to start with My Heart is a Chainsaw before reading Don't Fear the Reaper. So go read that one if what I tell you about Don't Fear the Reaper interests you at all. In Don't Fear the Reaper, we start 4 years after the action in My Heart is a Chainsaw. So at the end of My Heart is a Chainsaw, there's a whole lot of death and destruction in the town of Proof Rock. And at the center of it is a young woman named Jade Daniels. 4 years later, she has just gotten out of jail after going through 4 years of court cases and not being able to make bail, and maybe winning one court case and then being called back in because it was a win, not by being found innocent, but because something went wrong. So it's been 4 years of that. And she decides, as you do in horror novels, that, one of the good ideas is to go back where all that happened. Now, Jade is going back on this evening to say thank you to the sheriff of the town, who has sort of become a father figure to her. Unfortunately, on the day that she decides to head back to Proof Rock, there's a huge blizzard, and it's the same day that the state has decided to transport serial killer Dark Mill South, which, I mean, if you're going to name a serial killer, Dark Mill South is a good name for a serial killer. So they decide, let's transport him on this blizzard day and see what happens. Well, of course, everything goes wrong. Dark Mill South ends up in Proof Rock. Jade Daniel ends up in Proof Rock. Lots of characters from the first novel who came out alive end up back in Proof Rock. And terrible things happen, as you would expect. People are going to die. Jade is there trying to protect the ones in the town whom she still loves and cares about and who have had her back for the last 4 years. So it comes down to this showdown in a blizzard on an iced over lake. So there's lots of action. There are characters that you do come to care about. It is not just a slasher novel. You come to care about these characters. And it is going to be a trilogy, so there's going to be a third book. But at the end of this one, you do at least know what happens to Dark Mill South. So in each book, there is an ending to it, and then some smaller things that carry over, as well as some of the characters. So if you're a horror fan, pick up pretty much anything by Stephen Graham Jones. This particular trilogy is really great. You're really going to care about Jade Daniels and her history and her relationships with the others in the town. 2 thumbs up. Also, I know she's a fictional character, but she is a strong woman character as well. So for women's history, it kind of tied in that way. Also, for, St. Patrick's Day, she had a lot of luck on her side too. So there you go, tied that in. And then because I've only been reading sequels, I had a hard time picking my second book. So I decided to talk about the book that we most recently did for book club, which is Pip Williams's The Dictionary of Lost Words. And I will say, this book was not universally loved by my book club. There was a lot of, it starts off slow. I wasn't sure about the characters. I didn't really know where the book was going. But by the end of it, I actually had one book club member say, I don't know how it happened. I didn't care in the beginning. And then by the end of it, I was in tears. So stick with it if you like historical fiction that has a lot of layers to it, which this one does. So in 1901, and this is real history, in 1901, the word bondmaid was discovered missing from the Oxford English Dictionary. And so Pip Williams got this little piece of history and decided to create a fictional story around it. So this story centers on Esme, and Esme is the daughter of a gentleman who works on the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, before reading this, I knew nothing about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary, except that it took a really long time because, no computers, no word processors. So Esme is raised in the scriptorium, where all of these men are putting together all of the entries for the Oxford English Dictionary. They have very specific rules for what words can get in and what words don't. They have to appear in literature a certain amount of time. They have to, there's a whole bunch of them, and I don't remember all of them. The literature one was the big one. And over time, Esme begins to realize that some words don't make it in the dictionary. So, and these are words that she hears the maids in the house using. These are words she hears when she goes to the marketplace. And she starts to wonder why some words don't make it in. And she asks her father, and he says, well, they aren't, they don't appear in literature often enough. Well, she starts to think, who is most of the literature that they have access to in 1901 written by? Almost all of it is written by somebody who's educated, at least, and has the ability to read. Almost all of it is written by somebody who has money and the ability and leisure to be able to write. And almost all of it is written by somebody who's white and male. And so words that are related to women, words that are related to people of color, words that are related to people who are uneducated, don't seem to be making it in the dictionary. And as Esme gets older, she starts to collect her own dictionary of words from the women around her, from the women in the marketplace. And it's fascinating. She keeps them all in a trunk, and it's just really interesting. So there's that layer about who controls language and how that affects the stories that we are even able to tell and how those stories are saved. So that's part of the layer. Another layer that goes in with this is also during the suffragette movement in Britain. And so Esme's watching the newspapers and the stories of Emily Pankhurst and the suffragettes and how they are fighting for the right to vote. And she's trying to make her own decision of how she wants to be involved in that fight, because she sees one side where they are doing everything that they can. They're very in your face. They're being arrested. And she also reads the stories of the hunger strikes of the suffragettes and the brutal way that they are force-fed. And I didn't know anything about that, and that was shocking to me. That's a real part of history. So that's a layer that's in there as well. And there's also a layer of Esme and her personal life, and the fact that she has pretty much decided she doesn't want to be married, and how that affects her and her life choices that she has available to her. So there's just all these, and World War I comes into it later on in Esme's life. There's just all these layers of things that are happening. So if you like character-driven, slow burn, historical fiction, particularly focused on women's history, the Dictionary of Lost Words may be for you. I will say we had a fabulous discussion at our book club. Our book club is super fun. And what tends to happen is we talk about the book for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we talk about other things for the last half hour or so. And this time we talked about the book for a full hour because there was just so much in there to unpack and discuss. So I think this is a really good book. I listened to it. I think you can listen to it. You can read it in print. Either way is going to be a great way to experience the Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. And I can't remember the title of her next book, but she has a new book coming out within the next couple months as well. So if you enjoy that one, and again, it's related to women's history. So those are my couple of books for March. So thank you to Jessica and Jody for sharing the books that you've been reading and enjoying. Thank you to those of you who listened, and we'll be back again in April. Bye.